Hey, what is going on you guys? It's Epic here, and what if I told you you might be using Cryo wrong in Borderlands 4? Well, basically, there is a bunch of things about this element that a lot of people don't know, and I was one of them for a long time, so I wanted to put together this comprehensive guide to basically give you the rundown on how this element actually works in the game, so you can avoid wasting skill points in your builds. But if you're not one of those people, then congratulations and feel free to skip this video. Otherwise, if you're ready, feel free to leave a like on it, sub to the channel, and let's get right into it. Alright, so first of all, let's talk about what is cryo efficiency. So cryo efficiency is a stat that is utilized on enemies when you try to freeze them, and essentially the easiest way to explain this is that almost every enemy in Borderlands 4 has what you could refer to as a freeze meter. So to keep this simple, let's do some references to other games where you may be familiar with stuff like stun meters, where they have a secondary health bar that you can see on your screen, and the more you attack them, it builds and builds and builds, and if you get it all the way to the end, it will stun them for a duration. Well, this is exactly how freezing works in Borderlands 4, the only difference is that you just can't see it. It's an invisible bar, and I'll show you an example here on screen of what that bar would look like. It is just basically an invisible bar designed to keep track of how frozen an enemy is. Now, like I said, the bar is invisible, you're never going to see it in game, but it is there to keep track of the freeze status of the enemy. Now, the bar also has a threshold, and when you hit this threshold, you are going to execute a freeze on the target, which will typically encase them in ice. However, there is certain aspects where you won't be able to, such as big bosses. They just won't be frozen in ice all of the time. The back hive is one of them. They will just get a max freeze and be very, very slowed down. So I'll show you what that looks like right here. So this is with the normal, just fully slow. So if we shoot this enemy here, you'll see that they're going to become completely encased in this cold effect right here, but they are not frozen. It's not like there is icicles being formed around them. Alright, so comparatively, let's show you what happens when you actually successfully freeze an enemy. So this guy's not going to work because he's cryo resistant, but one of these guys should do, and you will see that when I do fully freeze them, they are going to become completely encased in ice and be unable to move. And when they are encased in ice, they are going to take dot damage, which is another important thing we need to talk about. Now, it is important to remember that, again, even though you cannot freeze completely every enemy, you still can get them to max slow value, which is going to benefit you in a combat encounter regardless. So in that sense, cryo still has that use case. But as I pointed out, should you be able to encase an enemy in ice chunks, then they are going to start taking dot damage, and when they do, they will now be eligible to receive extra dot damage from skills that give you stuff like status effect damage. That will now begin boosting the damage they take. But something else is happening. When an enemy is completely frozen solid by cryo, they are going to take double the melee damage, 100% more. So they become debuffed to melee, less than they were in previous games, but they are still debuffed to melee damage, which I feel like a lot of people still don't know. So if you're rocking a melee build, maybe consider putting some cryo in there to help get more damage out of it. However, running cryo does come with one major drawback, and it's that weapons have cryo efficiency listed on the card, and in some cases, the stat really isn't all too great. Now, in a typical sense, you do want to aim for at least 100 efficiency on weapons, but of course it's not a perfect world, and sometimes you're going to get less, sometimes you're going to get more. So how is this going to work? Well, basically it's very simple, and I'll keep it simple without confusing you. A lower number on efficiency is worse, and a higher number is better. If I have 200% cryo efficiency versus 100%, you can naturally assume that I will freeze an enemy faster than if I had a smaller number, right? So if you find something with really, really low efficiency but really high damage, it may even turn out that you're just going to find yourself killing enemies before you can freeze them a lot of the time, something which does reduce the amount of use cases for cryo depending on the build you're running. Now, naturally, you are going to see on other guns like this Anarchy, which is shock, that it has a 7% chance to inflict shock, and you are used to being able to buff that with status effect chance, but can this happen with Cryo? Well, the answer is simple, and it's no. We have tested this, and unless there are very, very few cases that we've missed out on, it seems that the only way to increase this stat is when it is specifically outlined with the Cryo effectiveness stat, which is in-game already. As you can see, Eamon has Wrath of Nature, which will give him 37.5% boost. So even though status effect chance isn't going to do much, just remember that status effect damage is, and it will be handy to the damage they do take from dots when they are frozen, that being the cryo dot. But you don't always have to freeze an enemy solid in order to get a cryo dot on them. There are also cases in the game where the devs have specifically outlined when they will give you a cryo dot. For example, in Eamon's blue tree, he has Tail of the Comet, where they specifically mention that there is a chance to apply a cryo status effect that will deal cryo damage over time. And this can be affected by status application chance. Now, I know that this might be a little confusing, but we're in the home stretch now, so there's two more things I want to talk about. Firstly, let's talk about cryo dots themselves a little more and what can or cannot cause cryo damage over time. So, like I said, sometimes the game is going to outline it, like with Tail of the Comet, and sometimes it is just not. For example, in our case, we have found that the Rainbow Vomit, for whatever reason, can cause a cryo damage over time effect. Now, not exactly why that happens, but just be aware that there is cases where you are going to be able to deal a cryo dot, maybe by design and maybe not. But just don't rely on it with all weapons you pick up, because for the most part, it is dependent on getting the enemy frozen, and with a lot of the weapons that we've tested with, they just won't apply a dot otherwise. But don't sue me if you find a couple that do, because it can happen, right? I mean, it's a Borderlands game. And the last thing I want to talk about in this video before we end off is when it comes to freezing enemies, do you need to deal continuous damage? And the answer is maybe. Now, if you have an extremely high cryo effectiveness percentage, like 500% for example, it's unlikely. And in a lot of other cases, like with Eamon's red tree, he will have Hawk Cleave, which is basically guaranteed to freeze enemies. Similarly, in the green tree, he also has Searing Cold, which is also guaranteed to freeze enemies or apply max slow. So in those cases, no, you do not. But if you have low cryo efficiency, like for example, the weapon I have here is just sitting about around 100, you'll see that when I'm shooting the target, it's not going to instantly freeze them. So this kind of just goes back on what we said earlier, that you may find yourself with low efficiency killing the enemy before you can even freeze them. So if you're depending on them being frozen for something, say you want to then throw a Slippy to get more damage, for example, don't count on it if you have a really low efficiency stat. And if you are damaging an enemy and they are partially cryoed, but you find yourself, let's say, going down, or you have to take a few minutes to gather your breath, or you have to reload, or maybe you turn your attention to another enemy, just be aware that that cryo bar that you're trying to build up to hit that threshold to freeze the enemy can just have a cooldown period where it will go back to normal. Right, so if you're not doing damage after a certain amount of time in the cryo element, it is going to reset the freeze bar and you're going to have to build it all up over again. And so I'll give you a live example of that right now. So this guy, he is partially frozen here, but if we count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so he starts around the 4-second mark to return to normal. Now, not sure if this is the same for most enemies, but basically you have a couple seconds window to deal more cryo to them to prevent that from happening. So there you go, that is some information on how cryo works in Borderlands 4. Now, there's only one more thing we didn't talk about in this video, and that's how much damage you're going to deal against other enemies with cryo. And for that, I'm going to link a guide down below on Mobalytics where you can check out all of the elemental affinities in the game and how they work. And until the next time, you guys, thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to leave a like on it and sub to the channel, and I will check you all in the next one. Take it easy.